Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for welcoming me here at the Theosophical Society and just for showing up. This is the first time I've had a chair. They asked if I wanted a chair. I just felt like I should have like a sifter of brandy or something. You know, it's just, but I thought this would just be easier, and it keeps me in one place so that you're not, you know, watching me move around a stage. But yeah, very much welcome. And obviously it is timely, ghosts and spirit entities. This particular thing, there's a class that am going to be doing that starts this Saturday, which is the Ghosts and Entities class. This class did come about during the development because when we started over at, originally at Harper College, which is teaching, I just had this vision of an entire program. There's a serious lack of proper, if you will, education, taking it more into the sciences, and in this case, more into culture. And I had some very good, long conversations and had the benefit of co-teaching one of the classes with a cultural anthropologist. And the more I became involved in it, I realized that I was doing an injustice. And what that was is I would talk about the entities, and there was so much that was not being said. One of the things is on here, and I'm just going to associate myself here, so we have different types of entities. That's basically what we're talking about here. But looking at it from a cultural aspect, one of the things that really got into as far as the ghosts and entities is it really needed to move beyond of, okay, this is an intelligent entity. This is a residual entity. This is a poltergeist. This is a demon, and just leaving it at that. Or saying, you know, things that I have said in the past. You know, well, if, you know, Uncle Jake was a jokester in this life, he's going to be a jokester in the next. But it really does go so much deeper than that. When you're looking at things, and I do a lot of things from a scientific perspective, teaching the sciences as they're involved. Well, cultural anthropology is a science. And if cultural anthropology really is so underestimated in this field, and here's some of the reasons why, because we need to understand and have a perspective of where not only the Western culture, our viewpoint on things came from, but how other cultures may view it. Because if in fact, which we do believe, and I do know, I shouldn't say, but if in fact that Uncle Jake is a jokester in this life, he's going to be a jokester in the next, what else is Uncle Jake going to be doing or not doing or believing or not believing? Because our behavior, our belief system, when that goes from culture in itself is what people know and do. So this encompasses religion. This encompasses even scientific. It's our belief system. And this will carry with the person when they pass over. That's one point. But then the other one gets into delving more into all the subcategories. So I'll continue here. The biggest thing is like these are some of the questions that you would end up asking, which is, you know, what are those that we consider ghosts? Are they all just deceased people, humans from this life that have passed over? Are we talking about other types of entities? Are they even dead? Which sounds kind of odd. Well, it's like, well, they're not here. But then you do start bringing in other factors if we're dealing with multiple dimensions, time and space, quantum entanglement. There's a multitude of factors that do lend itself to this topic matter. So, you know, like I said, some of the things of where are they, what form are they in, it really has to go past just catching something to prove. We really need to start understanding how is this occurring. And then when you are dealing with homes or families in particular, which is how I started out, much more than I think is going on now. There's a multitude of groups out there. To so many of these things you get into, like attached to people, they're attached to places, attached to things. Do they haunt, scare, protect? All of these things are, in fact, true of what goes on. So I'm going to start back, though, at the culture, because this really is the beginning of everything with the ghost and entity spirits. Really, really simple. Culture, things that groups of people know and do. If people make culture, culture makes the person at the same time. Culture belongs to a group of people. It's something that's learned from others. We're here together because of cultural beliefs. We're sitting here because it's something that we share. So it's really pretty basic in what that encompasses. It also accounts for differences. And those differences we do need to know, because if you are dealing with home cases or a business, you're profiling your entities that you may come across, as well as the families, because you have to see, what their stance is, what's going on in their life. There's questions that will be asked on a form pre-going from what are your religious beliefs? Has anyone, performed any types of seances, those types of things, down to, is there anybody in the house that's on medication? If so, what kind? It can get quite personal, and people will answer these questions, because if they're calling for help, they want help. Most of the time, if somebody's not frightened, they're okay. They're not going to call you. It might just be a curiosity, but they'll kind of just deal with it. It's more in cases where somebody's frightened. And generally, I'm going to tell you, people are frightened from lack of knowing. I was going to say the word ignorance, but that has such a bad sound to it, doesn't it? But but that's a very innocent way. They just don't know. So what we want to talk about is what people believe to be true, but how this is going to affect somebody who has passed on that you may come across. So now we'll get through this. So I start out, and some of the things that will be, they'll talk more in depth about in the class, of course, would be talking about different cultures and what their beliefs are. I will tell you this as we go through. We've got the, human, or we've got, if I'm talking about Africa, if I'm talking about Vietnam, or I'm talking about, trying to think of somebody else that I have. One thing that seems is that all of them do share something with us. That there is a belief, might have different reasoning as to why, but there's a belief that they can make you ill, make you sick, and or protect. Two kind of basic bottom principles that do seem to carry across. However, the cause of why that would occur can be very different. But again, the similarities is pretty much just how we run our lives here. Is that there seems to be a respectful view. If things are treated properly, if they're respected, everything's going to be fine. Proper burials, whether that means in the ground with a body burial or a cremation, that may vary. But again, the certain principles are pretty much the same across the board. But there are some things where you're dealing with, if you have a shaman, and they deal with ghosts in a variety of situations, and there's things, power dreaming, or the souls, sometimes there's different levels that they believe that they may go to. They might turn into animals, owls. There's a thing. There's also a thing where some of them, on certain ones, that this, as the last line states, the soul will go through several transformations. And again, that's something that through many different cultures, various ways, is true. Ghost sickness. This is interesting because even on investigations, because a lot of what this is, as far as ghosts and spirit entities, is in relation to not just the entities, but to what you may come across, particularly in your home or in investigating type situations where you have to discern what is going on, what is the intention. You know, is it something that's malevolent? Is it benign? I mean, there's a variation on it. In Africa, now the reason I brought some of these, and I'm not going to go into depth on all of these, but one of the things that's really not good about this is the improper burial, and this is something that's happened. So when you're dealing with certain countries that are like right now, Liberia or the Congo, you know, certain areas and places that are being hit by Ebola very hard, they're not getting proper burials. And this is causing a lot of concern on a personal level for these people, because they have fears that their families members are going to be wandering for eternity and become very distraught over this. And here's where it gets interesting. If this is their belief system, and in fact they don't have the proper burial, and when they die this is what they believe, more than likely this is what's going to happen. It seems very much that what we do believe in this life will carry over to the next. Don't know. Anybody tells you any of this for a fact, that they know this for a fact, that you just can't. But what we do look at is we look at patterns. We look at observations and try to, you know, build a body of work, if you will, by looking at that, the correlations. So if you have something like this and they're not getting buried properly, what's really sad is there's a lot of souls out there that are going to be wandering now, because this is what they believe will happen. A majority of them, this is exactly what is going to happen. Now, there is the possibility of learning and proceeding more on the other side, but as far as we can tell, at least at this point, this is the type of thing that's going to happen. Now, if you've got in the Kung, the thing with them is that they can really cause serious illness, and they have to have ceremonies performed over the living to help them, and or to help the deceased that have gone on. And there's all types of different and various religious traditional beliefs that may be carried out. The healings seek to establish health and growth on a physical, psychological, social, and spiritual level. It involves work on the individual, the group, and the surrounding environment and cosmos. It is very, very connected to them. They are very connected to their dead. There are some tribes and cultures that it will follow for 4 to 5 generations afterwards, that the family members are expected, the ones who have deceased and passed on, are expected and remain an active part of their family. They may even go as far as to dig them out of the ground, take the bones out of the ground, clean them, wrap them nicely back up in linens, and put them back in the ground, and this will go on, and then the next generation will do it, and then the next, and this goes on. So life, death as much as life, is a very precious thing to people. They take it to heart. Again, another country that had Vietnam War. You have, and the reason I brought this out is to just give you some of the statistics on here. Well, improper burial, you've got angry ghosts. So there's a lot of angry ghosts running around in Vietnam. Because at this point, if they do not have a proper burial, and not only that, not only are they angry, now this, for generations, will affect the families, the living. And again, this is what is believed. So, just kind of gonna skip through a few slides here. But what we really want to get into is the Western culture. What is this phenomena with paranormal investigation and our whole interest in it. I love the fact, even as little as 15 years ago, you could not have the conversations that you have now with people. And I see nodding, I see, because, you know, I can't tell you, I was doing this for years, and I think it probably took me to about maybe 4 years ago to where I finally, for the most part, and I bet you still on occasion I do, lost the prefacing everything with, I know this is going to sound crazy, but, and you don't have to do that as much now, because even if you do say that, immediately somebody else comes in the conversation, and somebody else, and people are now talking, which is wonderful. It is awesome, because that is going to be the key, because we, again, just like culture, we do learn from each other and those experiences. Every once in a while, somebody will say, I've got, something crazy to tell you, and I'm like, there's probably nothing that you can tell me that I haven't heard before. And every once in a while, something still pops up, and I'm surprised. And it's interesting because you put it in, and then sure enough, you'll hear it again. So you start to look at it, though, is it our views, which is that connection to what happens, how they're going to behave, of how we view it, that makes that difference, and how it's all handled with each other and with the afterlife. So here's some things I do want to point out, is that if we think about our own culture for a minute, ghosts have appeared in literature, since there was literature, really, first writings. There are two things, and I always say this, and this is absolutely true. If there's two things throughout time, throughout history, and throughout time and culture, two things that are in common: music and ghosts. So initially it was passed down more in a folklore type of way before there was literature, and when that came out, a lot of these stories sometimes transferred from maybe Eastern culture and picked up by Western and made into, or European and made into maybe fairy tale. So it becomes very, very difficult, although it's written down, most of it is considered mythological. There is what I consider a disturbing trend going on, in that we are moving past that, and now a lot of these mythical beings are being taken as a given. And this is what I mean by this. Well, one more point I do want to point out is that 2700 BC is the oldest written work of literature that ghosts are mentioned in. So we talked about the basic categories. So we've got 5 basic categories. We've got the intelligent. Intelligent basically means they're interactive and communicating with you in an intelligent way. I'm sitting here right now, and I am talking to you about my glasses, and let's say if I had a recorder running, I would get an EVP. An EVP is an electronic voice phenomenon. Meaning we're sitting here, you don't hear anybody but me talking. When I play that recorder back, right after I finish this sentence, there's a male that'll be saying, Mary, be quiet, you're talking too much. So they're responding in time to what is going on. If I picked up my glasses, they may say glasses, and I've had this happen. Talking about something unpacked, they'll say unpack, and respond to questions. And so it's just as much as we have a conversation with each other, they have that, and that's what we consider an intelligent entity. So residual is something that plays itself out like a film loop. It happens whether we suspect, it happens whether we're there or not, and that's like cameras and things when no one's around will sometimes capture these events. And that could be something moving, but more likely it's going to be a person. A woman comes down the stairs at 3 p.m. every day. She walks up to the stove and turns and then starts walking and fading away. And this is going to happen whether we're there or not. And now there's a couple theories on what that's considered. Trapped energy, or imprinted energy, if you will, is there. There's also another cause that it could be, which has to do with, again, the multiple dimensions. We are in a lot of theoretical states, science-wise, but there's just that, that given of it's not proven, it's not fact, it's not scientific law, but it's a very accepted theory, you know, across the boards in the sciences. So if it's, the reason I bring that up is because if there is a different point in time, I say this, it's like looking through a keyhole. You know, an X marks the spot. You know, time and space as far as continuum is that if we're looking through this tiny, tiny little pinhole, and I'm looking at September 3rd at 3:33 p.m. in 1933, that's all I'm going to see is, you know, September 3rd, 3:33 p.m. at, you know, 1933. And so there's an entire world, an interaction going on just like ours, except there happens to be some type of portal opening, tear in the fabric of time, however you want to describe it. And there's a multitude of theories exactly how that could be. But however that is, you're just seeing that exact point. So you're going to see that woman come down. But you're not going to have that interaction because there is just it's like a one-sided. So there's a couple theories as to how that can happen. Another one is poltergeist. Poltergeist is it's getting better, but it's probably one of the most misunderstood. Everybody thinks, you know, we see the movies and we all think, you know, the poltergeist and I don't know, the walls are going to bleed and, you know, things are just very strange things are going to happen. It's something demonic, more times, you know, very negative, a type of thing. But usually that it's a separate negative entity. More times than not, a poltergeist is caused by a human agent. Whether it generally, teenage girls seem to be the biggest culprit, if you will, but it's all subconscious, it's not intentional. But it can also be done later on in life, and I've had cases like that where I had a woman who, there were 3 daughters, they were all grown and out of the house, but the one had come home. She was going through a very bad divorce. She was suffering a lot of anxiety and issues, was on medication, was just, you know, just very distraught. She came back home, and sure enough, this activity that was there when they were teenagers started all over again. And more than likely, she was the cause. And as that came about, and getting to the other side of the case, it did in fact seem that that was it, because things did quiet down. This entity that was, this as they referred to her, this old woman in the attic, didn't actually speak words, but sounds were made. It was very imitating of what her perceptions, what she seemed to think was going to go on is what went on. And what that comes from is a mass of energy. We're all bioelectric beings, and we do have a bioelectric field. Some people, we might refer to it as an aura, but it's a very real thing. And so that energy that we are putting out does change its frequency according to our health, to our emotions. So if we are in a negative state, those generally do seem to be stronger. And what starts to happen is this starts to build almost, and I know this sounds kind of odd, I guess to say, but almost like an energy mass. And now all the negativity is in that. Occasionally, it's not super common, but occasionally, even when the human agent is now removed, it has now taken on a life of its own. But then generally you can get rid of it also with the human agent removed. But so most of the time, if you can get through and have the person learn different ways of dealing things, maybe it's meditation, maybe it's yoga, maybe whatever it is, medication, a lot of times that's going to change. But occasionally, if it's been going on too long, it does start to get a life of its own. Shadow people. Now that, again, has been a really up and down topic in the field. Shadow people initially was, well, shadow people are regular human beings that have passed on, and they are no longer, they just aren't capable, they don't have enough energy to manifest into a full-bodied apparition, meaning something that looks just like a person, you know, like a real, you know, person. And this may be the case in some of them. But there is also a lot of information that we're coming across that a lot of these shadow people don't appear to be human at all. And they were never human. And there are cases in which you will have shadow people. And when I mean shadow people, I mean it just looks like, you know, think of Peter Pan, you know, the shadow. It looks like a person. Generally, you can be in a dark room, and that shadow will be darker than the dark. But you can have a case like that where they're seeing shadow people, and that literally will be the only phenomena. There will be no EVPs, no audio, no phantom voices, no objects moving, no feelings, nothing else. And so, oddly, and I say this, but it's true. It's sort of like they're just they're lurking in the shadows, and they're just staying there. Doesn't mean, and again, there's that immediate thing, because we see, and we have to think about this. All the movies we've seen, you know, we've been conditioned since children. You see a black mass, you get scared. You know, most people do, like, yeah, because we associate black with bad or evil, and white with good, and God and things like that. It's just the way we've been taught to think. But that's not the case. Does not mean that there's many, many negative ones out there. I'm not going to tell you that there's not. But there's just as many that are just, and I say benign, meaning they're just there. They're not bad, they're not good, we don't know, they're just there. Now, demonic is another one, because there are definitely, whether you want to call it a demon, you want to call it a negative entity, there's multitude of names, and this is where we get caught up. There's a certain type of way that these types of beings function. They do attach to people. They can oppress people. That is the most common, is to be oppressed. And when I say oppressed, meaning that everything, and it will start and it will just continue on and on. Everything from your finances to your health to your relationships will be destroyed. It is not something that you want to go through. And then once you get to the other side, it is something you have to diligently be aware of and address for the rest of your life on this planet. So it is a very real thing. But possession, exorcist, is very rare. I had the good fortune of speaking with Lorraine Warren, of the Ed and Lorraine Warren, who haunting in Connecticut. Fantastic woman, one of the pioneers in the 50s. First of all, women in the 50s doing anything in a work type of thing was not that, you know, accepted. And so she was right there next to her husband out there doing this sort of thing and taking care of people and going out on these paranormal cases and dealing with demonic possessions. And I had concern. I mean, I think anybody would. And I just remember in this, she's sweet, you know, and she was quite elderly at the time, and she is now, but it wasn't this only, I don't know how many years ago. And she's like, dear, it just doesn't happen all that often. And her bottom line was like, relax. It's not going to happen, you know, because I'm like, but I'm out there, and then I don't know when I'm going to be exposed, and am I really prepared enough? And just like everybody else. You get those things until you learn more. And once you learn more, then you're not as afraid. So these are the things. Now here's where it gets tricky, and I do have concerns. Are they real or mythological? Not what I just talked about, because now things are happening, and I'd be listening to a radio show, and somebody was talking about, you know, some group is talking about a paranormal case that they're investigating. Yeah, and we went in, and it was a jinn, and I'm sorry, it's a jinn? Jinns are, mythologically, started out, well, actually, they started out, first is, and moved to genies, as we would know them as genies. There's about 5 different types of jinns. But they originally started out in, you know, Middle Eastern cultures and things. Here's the thing. We can barely tell when we're in the field what type of, well, I shouldn't say we can barely tell. We can tell what type of entity, meaning is it intelligent, is it interactive, or is it not? You can pretty much clearly tell if something is got the nature of demonic, which is a very nice, not nice, but a general overall hood, if you will, over it all. But when you start breaking things down, I don't understand. I don't understand how this is possible. I don't know how these people are making these claims. Now, this isn't to say that they may, you know, that they don't exist. Because as we know, by the time literature came along and we're starting to getting a written record and things are getting passed and they're getting translated and I can't tell you for sure. There's many cultures that'll tell you that they're real. But for us at this point in the Western societies to sit there and break it down more, not too good. So now we get into things like banshee. Something might have it. This is now Irish legend. A female spirit whose wailing warns of an impending death in a house. Now, if I'm in a case, and I've had people who've said this too, you might get something that displays this exact behavior. But I am not, we cannot take that leap to start breaking them down unless you get a name, and you will sometimes. Like on some of the demons, you will get names. They'll call out a name. So that's if you're getting a name and it says, you know, hey, I'm a banshee, okay, I'm all over that, you're a banshee. Until then, you're a wailing woman and I don't know what's wrong with you. So, I mean, these are just some of the things that we can talk about. So now, this is where it gets even trickier. I have a radio show. It's on hiatus right now. It'll be starting up in the Paranormal MD starting in 2015. I had somebody on, actually, well, this wasn't my show. I was doing it on somebody else. I was doing an interview on another show. And then I was listening to the conversation, and the person had said about, now they're on a case, and they saw a gnome. Now, most of us, some of us, not all, but some of us are going to giggle, you know, because we immediately think the little gnome guy's in the lawn. I'm like, I'm sure you did. Where were you? You know, but, but with that being said, other people are going to swear this is exactly what they saw. As a matter of fact, I've given a similar talk to this, and I had a woman come up to me afterwards and say, I've seen a gnome. Now, I'm not going to tell you that she didn't. She very well may have seen something that looked exactly like a gnome. But we also have to keep in mind that if we think that we're seeing fairies, or any of the, or gnomes, or any of these subcategories, that there's a perception of what they, so often we're still not 100% sure. Are we seeing them as they want us to see them? Are they tapping into our own memories, you know, to hippocampus or to our own memory or other storage, and using that to let us see them using our own images? I mean, we cross so many images in a day that we don't even remember. You know, like when you leave here and you think about all the faces and the colors and the clothes and the people that you saw, maybe, just maybe, something might pop up in a dream one day, but more than likely, most of it is just going to fall into the background. But it's there. It's there. So we're not 100% sure on this. So when we get into this, now I'm going to break this down because these are some of the things. Now again, this isn't to say that these elementals, as they're just a general referral, do or do not exist. I'm not going to sit here and tell you that they don't. But for the sake of moving forward as a paranormal investigative and research field, we have to be a whole lot more clear about how we proceed forward. Now, if we have religious or cultural or other types of things that might feed into why we think this way, I'm not saying, again, I'm not trying to take that away. But when you get into this, now here, let's do this. Other cultural names for fairies: elves, nymph, gnomes. Now, a gnome and a goblin is considered earth. Mermaids are water. We got elves, again, which falls under the earth. There are so many. Just like with the demons, if you ever actually just look through literature and or that type of material and looked at how many names of demons there are out there, I think there's probably like 50 plus. And each one of those now starts even breaking down. Same thing for this. So for us to go out on an investigation, or even for the individual at this point, with certainty to say, why, yes, that is a wee folk, and that is a earth, you know, this is a elemental and this is an earth. Now, it may appear to you this way. It may have certain behaviors, but those behaviors also imitate other types of entities that are out there. So we just need to be really, really careful about that. Elementals, generally they're mischievous, not evil. They're just like naughty children. In that way. And then we start breaking it down in earth fairies, where we get into flower fairies, crystal fairies, elves, gnomes, water fairies, water sprites, so on and so forth. You can see how complicated this could get if you're out and then somebody says, you know, I saw an earth fairy, and then they can even break that down into specific names. So it can get really, really tricky. So this is something that at this point in the investigation field, I'm discouraging. It's okay for if it's a homeowner or a business that you're at, the other person to say this and describe it, this is what I saw. But for us, if you're trying to really function beyond being a hobbyist, which most of these groups are, they might call themselves, they're doing it professionally. But quite frankly, many aren't. So I always say, you know, well, it's not really buyer beware, but you need to beware as the person who's having somebody in your home, making sure that they're very professional, and even down to things like background checks and stuff should be done. I mean, they're in your home, you know, and especially a lot of them don't want the homeowners around. I certainly, if I don't know you from, you know, anybody else, and I come in my home, yeah, sure, have the run of the place. I'll be back in, you know, 8 hours, and then nothing's there. You just don't know. So, I mean, there's things that you just want to do to protect yourself. But this is just a different way as far as protecting yourself. If the person comes to you and says, this is what I saw, then this is what they saw. I don't question that this is what they saw. However, our stance on the professional side of that needs to be a little bit different. And what we're coming back, rather than saying that this is a water fairy, and giving it down to something more specific, or saying, you know, whatever any of them are, you can say these are the behaviors we're observing in the entity that you're in, your home, in your property, whatever the case is, and describing it that way. When I have a report in a case, there's things where we really break it down into documented and undocumented personal experiences, and so on, taking that route. So all of these things will come out, but the names, we get hung up on the names, and they're like, but I saw a fairy and she had wings. I'm sure you did, you know. I mean, well, you know, first let me make sure you're not on medication. Now I believe that you're not, you know, whatever the case is. But we can't do that as professionals. All we can do is talk about the behaviors and how to best deal with them. There is a phenomenon if it's sort of like, and I have not even actually seen the movie, but somebody used this comparison, and I'm aware of what the movie is about. It's called the borrowers. And this does happen in that you put things down and they seem to be taking it, and it's like a little game. Like they're children. It's almost a little game that things are there and then they're gone. And then if you're like, I'm really going to be late for this meeting, can you please put my keys back? I need my keys. And then as you go to look in the next room and you come back out, and there's your keys on the table. So things like this do happen. But now, this is me being me, doing a lot of the science side. The other part of me says, well, maybe we're dealing with something to do with time. How is it happening this fast? That even if these entities are in fact the ones that are doing it, how do they do this so fast? Where is this coming from? Where is this manifesting from? And here, an instant, I had not had this happen in my own. I had this happen in my own home. And one night I came home, and I was, you know, doing the typical woman thing and worrying about, oh, I think I've put too much weight on. I better start measuring my food. What am I really eating here? So I had just put some cereal in a bowl, and I turned around and went to the cabinet to go just, you know, over here to pull out a measuring cup. So I had the cereal, and I also had 2 pills, which I have some medication that I have to take at night, laying on the counter. And got the measuring cup, came and turned around, and there's a pill sitting on top of the cereal. I was like, well, you got my attention. More than anything, the curiosity at that point was, come on, how did that happen so fast? What's going on here? I mean, if I were watching, would I have seen this pill levitate? Very probably, which is really odd to say, because we do see things like that. We catch video anomalies where we're seeing, you know, things move, nothing's touched, as far as we can see is touching it, but they move. But you do also think about time. And sometimes when something like that, if it's so quick or if it's really large or it's even more impacting that you have to question how is that happening. So one of the things I do want to say about this is that there has been some comparison between original fairy encounters and alien abductions. Because there's a lot of division in the field. It's, you've got the kind of ghost people who and this is not always true, but I say this in jest. You know, the ghost people who don't want anything to do with the UFO alien people, and the UFO alien people don't want anything to do with the psychic mediums, and the psychic mediums don't want anything to do with, or the psychic mediums are the only ones who will deal with it all, and the scientists want nothing to do with any of it. But there is a lot of crossover, and we do really need to start a better unity with ourselves on this, because there are some, not only just in a spiritual sense, if you will, or a metaphysical sense, but also in a science sense, that crossovers. If you're dealing with alien abductions, are we dealing with, not saying that they're, again, some of them are I'm sure, very real as far as what is going on. But some of them might really just be cases of sleepwalking and, oh, I just went blank. I just went blank. The opposite of sleepwalking. But what happens is that and this happens too for ghost encounters, like if you're dealing with an incubus or that type of thing, or people are saying, I was laying there and I'm trapped to my bed, and they felt like something was sitting on their chest and they can't breathe or they're choking. And what happens is that when we go to sleep, we literally, and I always kind of describe it this way, it's the easiest way to describe it. Think of there's like a little light switch in the back of the cortex there, and it shuts the nerves down so that we don't sleepwalk, because that's dangerous. Otherwise, we're acting out our dreams and we can hurt ourselves or other people. So it's intentional that the body will shut itself down so that you're not moving during those states of sleep. What happens is the opposite of that, and just for the life of me, that word's going to escape me, so we're just going to not mention that word, whatever it is. But when that happens, you have the opposite happens. You might be in a state of REM, and you are partially awake. So you are gaining a consciousness, but you are really still in a partial dream state. So you start feeling like there's these hallucinations of what you're going to see. You might be seeing something or having a fear. And here's something that's very common between those two, between the ghosts, people who say it was some type of ghost or a demon, an alien abduction, is that when this occurs, that a lot of the things are, and this is a physical condition, not metaphysical or spiritual. You're going to feel choking, you're going to feel pressure on your chest, and most of the time there is fear, anxiety associated, and the hallucinations are going to be not really nice in nature. So there's things that we need to look at that are common across the board on both of those. And these were just a couple of the ones that we were mentioning. A male demon believed to have sexual intercourse with women, incubus, and a succubus is the woman version of this. These pretty much, people will tell you that this exists, and they have experienced this. If we can determine that it is a demon and this particular thing is going, I would go down to this category and name it and say, this is what you're dealing with. But not too much, going too much beyond that into giving it some other types of names. The interesting part is, again, if you notice, this started in medieval folklore, where this type of phenomena started, and it lands up where there's some type of sexual activity going on in a person's dreams or while they're in bed, and again, that happens. The only difference here, too, is that for the woman, they're also, where they tempt men sexually at night, they also kill infants at birth. That one was added in where you don't find that as much for the male counterpart, the incubus counterpart. So, but again, here's an interesting thing. Merlin, the legendary wizard from King Arthur's legends, was supposedly sired by an incubus. So we have a lot of ties to these things in mythology. But again, we have to be really careful, because these written words were, again, cause of translation, or they were folklore passed down before they became written word. So you do have to question, there's always, I think in most things there's always a little bit of truth, if nothing else, in what that account was. Shadow people, again, although that's one thing there are phenomena like Hat Man or a hooded figure. They will come out. They are often associated with evil or negative energy, as well as possessions, manifesting, and they will just disappear. They will show themselves. They will disappear. A lot of times, these will show up. People will see and describe it not together, not like a mass hysteria thing or something like that, but they will report seeing a shadow, looked like a man in a hat, but it was a black shadow. That happens when there's a bad event going to occur or has occurred. Initially, it was like, well, are they doing something to cause it? Are they there as a warning? You're going to have some people who are going to count it this way, and some people are going to say it's the other way. The really important part is that people are coming up with very specific things. You know, it's much like seeing a ghost. If you describe a Civil War woman, you know, we talked about the woman coming down the stairs and going to the stove, and she's wearing a blue skirt and a white blouse, and her, you know, and she's got glasses. And you have people over a 10-year period that have never met each other and are giving the same account. You have to pay attention. It doesn't make sense not to. So we know that it's occurring. It's just how, why. Again, these dark hooded figures, like some of the ghost entities, are much like the other cultures in that they cause illness. They can make people have headaches, sick, distraught, anxiety, fears, different psychic experiences, and of course the ever being watched. Out of curiosity, I just have to ask it by show of hands, how many people here have experienced what they felt like nobody being there, and they have been and they feel like they've been watched? So we've got, yeah, it's probably about probably about 40% right now, I'm guessing. Quick run over. How many people here believe in ghosts? Interesting. How many people here believe in Bigfoot? I knew, it's interesting. I'm going to tell, and I used to throw this one in now because I have a friend he's a cryptozoologist. And I listened to him lecture, and it really made me think. And he says, you know, I find it interesting. Everybody here believes in ghosts. But nobody can believe in the fact that there might just be a creature out there that we haven't discovered yet. I mean, we go into the ocean, we're finding things every day. We're still finding new life forms that we haven't found yet. And I was like, that's sort of true. You know, it is quite true. But also, again, bringing in that aspect, let me ask one more question. How many people here believe that multiple dimensions as far as time and space, there being copy universe or other universes out there, may exist? Then you should believe in Bigfoot. How do you know? If we can have crossover, if there's other universes or time, who's to say that there aren't these types of temporary portals or wormholes that are being formed? We're finding new energy that may keep these wormholes open. He could certainly pop in and out, just as much as a ghost could. Just thought I'd throw that one out there. Just trying to broaden the thing. But some of the things that I do talk a lot about, and most of it, even in this ghost and entity class that I will be doing, is bringing in things like neuroscience and physics and wormholes and quantum entanglement, because it is a really important emerging part of the paranormal field. And there is a small handful of people doing any type of serious research. Most of the time it's like, well, if we take this piece of equipment, we do this, is what's going to happen. There's maybe 5%, and I could be very wrong. I think but rather than getting better, I think it's getting worse. We're getting more and more people out there doing this sort of thing. And this is why it was really important for me to start a paranormal studies program and want to continue these types of classes elsewhere in that build, in a sense to educate, to broaden people's perspectives, to make them think outside of the box, and in this case, the TV box, most of the time, and to start learning that these types of things really do have a very real and valuable part, just as much as anything else that we study, whether it be religion, culture, any type of literature, metaphysics. It all plays an important role. If somebody asked you to define yourself, would you be able to define yourself by saying, I'm evil, or I'm a good person, or I'm only, if you know, could you just say the entire definition of who you are as a person is, I'm a Christian? It's not. There's so many aspects to us, so many that we need to look at, and just how we're made up physically, how our brains work, what our real perceptions are, and so forth. So I don't want to get too much into this, and we're going to kind of leave that almost at that, but just really try to keep in mind as you deal with not just each other, but possibly with the other side, as you're looking at it and your perspective, is that culture in your entire belief system does make a difference on how the other side is going to behave and how you understand them as well. So if you're here, you got to find out, are you going into a house where the person died was Muslim, Buddhist, Christian? It's going to make a difference. And that's pretty much it for tonight.
Take questions?
Yeah, absolutely. If there's any questions, I'm welcome them. We'll work our,
Just
wherever
wait
he goes,
for the
that's where
microphone.
So these dark entities are out there, Mary, as you told us about. How do you protect yourself and your loved ones and keep everybody in the light?
How do you protect yourself? There's a multitude of ways. And again, it's going to make a difference into intent and what your belief system is. Because I may use sage and the next person may use holy water. And it seems really to make the difference the intention, what you believe. Because our energy is stronger. This is our realm. This is our world in the present. And our energy is stronger than any energy coming from the other side, whatever that other side is. And so the protection comes from whether it be stones, cleansings, some people may use salt, you know, there's a multitude. It really does come about intentions and being diligent about doing that for yourself and for others. And of course, there's a whole long answer to that, but in a nutshell, answer, okay?
What is an orb?
Oh, one of my favorite topics. Orbs. 99.9% of all orbs are going to be either digital or photographic anomalies. There has been, I always say 10, but it's more like 20-fold, if that's possible. Then there used to be over film, still film photography. You're seeing orbs in the digital world so much more than you never used to. It's just the way the camera is and having to do with settings and aperture and those types of things. Another thing with that is that it is going to be dust or bugs or flares, moisture.
But they have faces.
Pareidolia. And pareidolia is our perception. And see, this is why neurology becomes important for people to learn and learn things about our bodies and how our eyes work with rods and cones. And pareidolia has to do with our perceptions. It's just as much you're seeing a face in that orb, just as much as the next person will look up at the cloud and see a bunny. I know it's, and I don't mean it insulting, and I'm not. I say that with all due respect. It just is a very natural thing. I'm one of those people that absolutely doesn't see things in anything ever. And then the person next to me is like, well, you don't see, and I'm like, no, what? That's supposed to be an eye, and that's supposed to be a what? And you know, it's a perception of how our brains work. Our brains are designed. The number one thing seriously, the number one thing our brains are designed to do, as far as when we're looking at something, is to have facial identification. Not only that, is our brains will outright lie to us. It does not like to not know, and it will fill in gaps and stuff. So you can see it, and it's a very, very common, very common thing. The other thing with orbs is when I say moisture, is there's a light refraction. the flashing, bouncing off. We don't see it. But if you looked at a dew count and you looked at moisture, and I have slides like I'll use in my presentations, and I'm like, and here's an orb, and sure enough, somebody's going to be like, they see something, and I go, and then I'll click to the next one where I just took a nighttime photo and just simply lightened it up. And now instead of 2, you're seeing 10. And then I lighten it more. Now instead of seeing 10, you're seeing 25 orbs in this photo because it's moisture. It's really hard. Any nighttime investigation where you're, or any investigation where you're outside or in a building that is not very well shielded, and this can happen inside too. I mean, if there wasn't moisture, we would have problems living. And we know that that's in the air, you know, and that will show up often in those cases. However, with that being said, there are other things, plasma ball, which is slightly theoretical in itself, that could be the cause of orbs, and it's much, much easier. Now, when you get into video, that if you're even dealt with infrared cameras or those types of things, I can tell before, if I'm on an investigation, I can tell if anybody's near the area, because you start watching, again, the pattern's like, oh yeah, there's no, oh, somebody's going to be coming up the stairs in about 90 seconds. And then you'll hear, you know, because you'll start to see movement. You'll see a couple things fly and things like that. With that being said, there are light anomalies. Now, and the same thing as an orb. But to take the jump, now, I'm going to tell you quite honestly that my gut on those very, very, you know, that 0.1% of orbs that really are a type of energy that I think is a spirit energy, does my gut say, yeah, that's probably the way the energy of the spirit is traveling and moving about before it manifests or does whatever else it's going to do? But as somebody who is researching, investigating it, it is a really, really big leap to say that this light anomaly, this energy, is a person. It's just a really big leap. We need to kind of fill that in, you know. We need to see, like in a movie where we're seeing a tiny little orb and something just blossom right out into, and here's Mary. If I, you know, this is the kind of thing, you know. But that would be like, you know, perfect, but that's not going to happen. But yeah, so do orbs, could they be spirit entities? Yes, but a very tiny percentage. And if you're seeing them in your photographs, without question, I can tell you. And again, if you have somebody who's really a photography expert, not somebody that just, you know, worked at Wolf Camera or something, you know, but really studied this, tell you, oh, I have absolutely zero explanation for it, then it would be worth looking into more. But yeah, that's not always the popular answer people want to hear, but I'm being truthful.
What's the most specific?
Can you wait, please?
What's the most specific, like, story you've seen where you've seen concrete proof and you were kind of blown away by what you saw? In a specific example, in a house or on one of your investigations?
Wow. Well, you know what, John? Could you ask what the second part of that question was?
Like, I want to know, where were you? Were you in someone's house? Did you see a figure? Did you see something move? Do you have a video of it? Like, what was the most convicting to you personally, specific story?
You know what? It's always going to be your personal experience. In seeing, if you're seeing it, because I always ask this in the classes, and I actually heard this from somebody else, and it was perfect because I started using it, and the answers were, I said, if I said to you right now, I'm going to hand you this stack of papers, scientific proof documenting that ghosts exist, would this make you believe? Most people will answer, no, I think I'd have to see it for myself. And that's the honest truth. I always say we're all from the show me state. We want to witness it. It always amazes me, people who have not had any experience of any kind and do believe. That amazes me actually more, I think, as an individual. So there's been a lot. I mean, Briefly, starting when I was 14, I did come across something that was, and again, I have to keep in mind that it is from the perspective of a 14-year-old, that memory, but it was a very involved story, and due to a lot of things that went on, it was more than likely something demonic. And as a 14-year-old, and probably almost to this day, because of where I was at that time, that was probably one of the most frightening things I've ever gone through in my life. Then also just seeing full-bodied apparition. And it's one of those when you haven't seen one before, and even if you've had other types of experiences, I've had a lot of shadows. You know, that's probably more. Seeing full-bodied apparitions is not that common. Capturing them is even less common.
So what was the one you saw?
It was a man. It was of a man, and it does look just like a person. It's probably 25, 30 yards from me. No, yards is feet, rather. Yards would be really far. He was just, you know, that kind of thing, not saying anything, just standing. And we did take a picture afterwards. It was within 2 minutes, 90 seconds to 2 minutes, after it disappeared, because it doesn't last generally that long. And when the picture was taken, what was captured in that same corner was a shadow person. So it does give some credence to that fact of, oh, there's not enough energy to manifest sometimes for the shadow people. Because it was almost like we were seeing it in reverse. Like I saw the full body, somebody who looked like a person, and then went into seeing the shadow. There's just a multitude. I think sometimes the EVPs, the voices, surprise me more. Because there's been a couple times where a response to something has been, somebody had asked, you know, we got in this we were kind of having a discussion over what our time and are they whatever, and said, well, do you know you're dead? And I was like, well, wait a minute. Or, you know, one guy said, as my son would say, maybe we're the dead ones. Are we dead? And I'm listening, and there's a male that comes back and says, yes. And you're like, you gotta be kidding me, what? You know, but just whatever the answers are or how they'll respond, I think sometimes because it's almost more personal, the voices, you hear them, and it's like us, you know, versus something more foreign like a shadow. So I don't know that I have any great stories for you. It's just like pretty much like everybody else. You see full-bodied apparition, you're going to see shadow figures, you're going to see, you're going to feel jolts of energy that just are off the charts sometimes, to where you just are like, okay, this is really uncomfortable, and I don't know how else to explain it, but as if it's an electrical jolt that just continues, and that static energy stays in you. You have to remove yourself from it if you cannot get them to stop doing whatever it is that they're doing. And sometimes it may not be intentional, by the way. It might just be unintentional by the mix of energies, by their energy just being in this place. So I'm sorry I don't have like some great, you know, like something swoop down story or something, you know.
I have one question that somebody sent in. It's rather long, so bear with me. From the accounts I've heard, it seems that negative supernatural phenomenon starts small and built over time, seeming to gain in power. What is going on? Does that spirit intelligence require our increasing attention to lead us into lowering our vibration to theirs? Do they only appear to get stronger when it is we who are making it easier for them by creating an energetic match by paying attention and or fearing them?
Wow.
It's long.
I think I forgot the first half of the question. No, it's okay. God, wow. I know it is. It was a lot of different little things in there. The energy and there is the theory that they do feed off of our energy, which is entirely likely. To be quite honestly, to say it with certainty again, we don't know that for fact, but yeah, that does seem to be the case. Because there is a life force, just like ours, where there's that bioelectric field. It can possibly provide a really good place for them to pull energies. At one point, early on, people were talking about batteries. You know, we were suspecting that battery drain was, and it's still, we don't know what causes this battery drain. It's a very strange phenomena. You're out and you have totally charged, and now you turn something on, thing's dead. What happened? Where did it go? So, I mean, we do have those kinds of things that happen. Does it increase over time? It could be a combination. It could be a fact of that they're trying to work harder to get our attention, because some people just refuse, particularly males, by the way, just really don't want to pay attention. Ask all the wives, they're like, I know, no. But they don't want, you know why? Because I will tell you this, it seems more times than not for the males who still have that feeling of wanting to be a protector, and they have this issue because how do you protect against something you can't see? So I do understand that. So sometimes it's better to just ignore it and it's not real than to have to deal with something that you don't know how to deal with. So yes, could it increase for that reason? If you're not paying attention, they're just going to work harder to get your attention. The other thing is that if there is something like a poltergeist type activity, certainly that would be being fed, and that would get more and more over time. I'm trying to think if I covered it on the question. I apologize to whoever asked that question if I haven't answered it right.
I think what they were asking was, part of it was if, like negative entities, if we don't lower our vibration, if we keep a high positive vibration, can we kind of distance ourselves from them?
Well, okay, that's good. Yes, I would say yes. But would it be a permanent thing? No. It's not going to, but that is much like what I was talking about with our energy being stronger. So if you're talking about a higher vibration versus a lower, that certainly could make a difference by distancing ourselves.
In your conversations with the intelligent entities, have you ever found out why some souls move on and some are still hovering?
Well, it's almost a little bit of that is in relation to what we were just saying, because there is if their souls have moved on, they're at seem to be vibrating what we would call at a higher vibration rate, and so there's a frequency is higher. Once they've passed over, and again, not to say where that over is to, we don't know, but once that has occurred, they can come and go. I have gotten EVPs. They can come and go. And I have gotten EVPs in that fact from voices from them that said, do you visit loved ones? I do. And that was the response, I do. Okay, you know, or I think it was actually, do you visit family members or something? But I had a case recently, and it was actually a historical museum. So there's a lot of artifacts in there. It's all set up to look like, and it was a home. It's a home. Was a home. It's a house, I should say now. And but it's still the home of the entities that live there. And it was also owned by a couple different families. One family lived there for a significant amount of decades. And then there was a boarding house also. So you got a lot of different things coming in, plus all the pieces that brought in, because they can attach. I always say, think of it as a noun. You know, they can attach to people, places, and things, but they also attach to circumstances. So you could have things, you know, with this. It had the opportunity to really research and use this place for different experiments over the last 3 years or so. I think it might be 4. And during that time, you get to know more. There seems to also be, though, what we might call trapped that they are not at that higher vibration. They have not moved on and cannot come and go. They've never left. So they are held here. They are earthbound. Now, in this particular case, most of them were seeming to come and go. But over time, I got the one investigation, you know, you do ask, does anybody, you know, well, need help? But this wasn't asked, and I don't think I had asked this after the first investigation. But randomly, as one of my investigators had passed through this kitchen area, you hear a female call out, seemingly to call out after her with a, you know, kind of dragged out, help kind of thing. You hear that, it breaks your heart. It really, really does. Because just as much as it's a person, you have that same feeling that this was a human being, and it certainly is a living soul. So the next investigation, I said, does anybody here need help? And this was not the same night, another time. Same female, just me. Then the third time, would you like me to try to help you, to move you on, to see, you know, or bring somebody in? Yes. So I did, after this, went back to the location in the day and talked to the curator there, and I explained that I would like to cleanse the house, and I'm going to try to do this. I'm going to try to move her on. Unless you're, you know, really just super duper, you know, medium on this, that, you know, you could get a better sense and know. I wasn't really sure, but at this point, two things had already, before I'd even gotten to the point of moving her on. One is the family that had been there for decades was getting no acknowledgement in this place, very little. The building was named after the person who built it. There were photos of that person or photos of other people throughout the town, historically, you know, throughout time. But this family, not so much. There was nothing. So I really think that what I'm finding, I think that if you gave some acknowledgement to them, I think it's going to make them really happy. So this all kind of happened within the same 2-week period, unbeknownst that I didn't know that they had been transferring slides into, you know, some of the slides and the photos, that they had already started working on putting a name out for which was the head of the household photos and so forth, and giving acknowledgement. At the same time, pretty much within the end of that 2 weeks, I went in and did this cleansing. I do remember warning my team, because we've used this place for research, and said, just letting you know, there's a really good possibility once we move her on, if she in fact moves on, the rest of her family's going to leave. And we, you know, the expression, you know, shoot yourself in the foot kind of thing, we no longer have our place to research. I have actually not been back there and or talked to the curator yet, but I got a text message from somebody else that didn't know any of this was going on. Had said, so I talked to so-and-so, and they said, it's been really, really quiet there. She hasn't heard anything. So I have to go back and find out more what's going on. But the bottom line is that, yes, they do have that vibration. They can move back and forth, but there certainly are ones that are earthbound, and they do have a different energy level. There does seem to be, you know, just a different way that's working for them.
Thank you.
Anybody else?
Just curious, have you come across any pets or animals that have been
I have.
spirits?
Early on, I was on, and it was a place, again, I've been really fortunate, because a lot of times you just go in and you get one, you know, shot. And I've had places where I've had the, you know, 3 years or so more at a time. Was a black cat. Why is it always a black cat? I don't know. Maybe it's a shadow cat. People just don't get it. Maybe they don't know it's a shadow. They just think it's a black cat. But it was a black cat that they were seeing on the stairs. I'd never seen it. Nothing, no camera ever caught anything. But people were saying this. And again, not related onto maybe an investigative team. People come in randomly into the building. Recently, however, I was at a place in Indiana, and Red Cedar, and it's a museum on the first floor and a lot of construction going on the second floor. And they're talking about, we were sitting and we knew that they had talked about a phantom cat. And so I did not hear it, but two other investigators had heard it, and they're like, did you hear that? Did you hear that? And it's like, yeah, it sounded like a cat. And yeah, well, and then one said, well, there's supposed to be cats here, thinking, we thought that we were first talking about living cats, like real cats, which would make sense in a place like that, you know, and mice and stuff like that. And they're like, oh, no, it's phantom. Oh, sure enough, in the audio that was backed up what they had heard, and I caught a cat meowing. I mean, it is clearly a cat. And then it happened again. It happened a second time where somebody else had caught it again with hearing this cat. I'd not caught anything on camera, but yeah, absolutely with, again, I don't know what the deal is. I hear this so much more with cats than with like dogs. I don't know. Personally, I actually had this. I never had anything, again, I'm not one of these people who has a lot of stuff happen in my own home, because I always kind of joke, and I swear I'm going to get a sign that says no fly zone, no ghosts, no fly zone or something. You know, I'm like, no, not here. But I had a dog I had for 16 years. And it was pretty much almost a year later, I had nothing on my mind. I wasn't thinking about it. And I don't know, you know, it wasn't my imagination. I don't know, but my personal thing is no, it wasn't. I was just getting ready for bed, and I had my dog, and you know how your pets have their routines of things that they would do. Well, what caught my attention was was at my nightstand, and I have a carpeted bedroom, and I heard that, you know, that noise that you get, where they'll take and they'll go like this in the carpet, and then they'll do the circle thing and then lay down. That's exactly, I was hearing that behind me, and did one of those looking, and I'm, you know, nothing's there. And so of course what I'm like, no, her name was Drew. So I'm like, hi, Drew. One thing before there's any questions, I do want to say something, because this is something I don't do nearly enough. In the back there, her name is Pam Herman. She is the administrative assistant, case manager, my left arm, right arm, and everything else in between, and just a wonderful, wonderful help. And I just want to take the acknowledgement to say thank you for everything that you do, because you don't get enough acknowledgement. But any other questions? Oh, there is.
The Brazilian culture has lots and lots of experience with spirits and their own knowledge and stuff. One of the things they say is spirits can attach to people in our weaknesses. That, like, if a person here is an alcoholic, a spirit who passed who was an alcoholic looks for someone in this world to attach to who's an alcoholic, which makes it doubly hard for this alcoholic to get over their problem. And I thought that's just important in terms of protection, to remember that our weakness could attract a spirit with the same weakness.
Well,
and, right?
You know what, you can land up with a lot of that. Could be also referred to, like, in a different way of looking at it, is life lessons that we need to learn. And that if there's such thing as, you know, if we have past life, or in which that you might have been an alcoholic and you come back in this one and you're not, that you may be not just addressing just a entity outside of yourself, but almost that, it's not an attachment, but the issues of that following you along. And is it that they're attaching to help or not to help, would be the question. Because you could certainly have someone who passed over was an alcoholic, and if they're attaching themselves to someone who is an alcoholic, it doesn't mean necessarily that they're grabbing onto their weakness to do something detrimental to the person. It could be the opposite, to where they actually have an understanding and they may be there to protect them. Because that does seem to happen a lot with families and friends, where they're there, like in that case I was just saying, that they actually, not just for the living, but stayed behind in helping the other person who was deceased, who hadn't passed to a higher plane as they had. So yeah, you're right. You do have to, whatever it is, whatever your weakness is, those are the things that you do need to protect. And I think there's a general protecting on that. You're protecting of your energy. And again, the multitudes of ways to do that. You can, in picturing yourself in a gold and filling with white light. And my biggest thing, and I say this a lot now because it really helped me, because I have a tendency to maybe not literally be empathic, but take in a lot of energies of other people. And that, again, those things can make you ill and just stress you out and so on and so forth. But particularly because of what I do, where I'm going out on these cases all the time, you don't know what you're coming across. And so you really have to be on high alert versus sitting in, cleansing your home and sitting in your home. And if you're going to do this where you're, creating a circle or a bubble around you, and some people can make it gold or white light and filling, but also taking it and putting mirrors on the outside. Because this way, as you go through your daily life, whatever's coming in at you is being reflected right back out. So it's like almost an extra little thing to add on there. And for me personally, that's helped. So weaknesses, yeah, you're right. Everybody should be aware that they absolutely could use it. That would be the case when you're dealing with something that's very negative, particularly something that's demonic. And again, call it whatever you want, but just think, think on that order. So, yeah, good point.